South Africa's political arena is once again ablaze with fierce debate, as President Cyril Ramaphosa finds himself under mounting pressure after remarks seen as sympathetic towards Zimbabwe's controversial land reform program. The Democratic Alliance, DA, has come out swinging, rejecting Ramaphosa's apparent praise for Zimbabwe's land redistribution, describing it instead as a catastrophic policy that unleashed famine, economic collapse, and decades of suffering for millions of Zimbabweans. The storm erupted after Ramaphosa, in a recent public address, suggested that Zimbabwe's bold approach to reclaiming land offered important lessons for South Africa's own land reform challenges. While the president was careful to avoid endorsing the violent methods used by Robert Mugabe's government during the chaotic farm seizures of the early 2000s, his comments were interpreted as veiled admiration for a policy that international economists, human rights groups, and even regional leaders have described as disastrous. The DA wasted no time in responding. In a strongly worded statement, Party leader John Steenhuisen condemned the president's remarks as deeply irresponsible and insulting to the countless Zimbabweans who continue to bear the scars of Mugabe's failed land grabs. He further warned that any attempt to romanticize or replicate Zimbabwe's experiment would send South Africa down the same destructive path, risking food insecurity, investor flight, and irreversible economic decline. To understand the gravity of this row, one must revisit the history of Zimbabwe's land seizures. What began in 2000 as a populist project to redistribute farmland from a few thousand white commercial farmers to landless black citizens quickly spiraled into chaos. The so-called fast-track land reform saw violent invasions of farms, widespread intimidation, and the destruction of highly productive agricultural operations. The result was devastating. Zimbabwe, once known as the breadbasket of Africa, saw its agricultural output plummet by more than 70%. A nation that previously exported food to its neighbors suddenly became dependent on international aid to feed its people. Hyperinflation, peaking at an astronomical 79.6 billion % in November 2008, wiped out savings and destroyed the middle class. Millions fled the country, many of them into South Africa, creating lasting migration challenges that Pretoria still struggles to manage. It is precisely this legacy of hunger, economic collapse, and social upheaval that the DA insists cannot be ignored. South Africans must never forget, Steenhuisen warned, that Mugabe's land program was not land reform, it was legalized theft, accompanied by violence, and it left Zimbabwe in ruins. To speak of it as though it offers lessons is reckless in the extreme. Ramaphosa's comments highlight the delicate balancing act he faces as leader of a divided ANC. On one side are moderates who recognize the catastrophic precedent set by Zimbabwe's policies. On the other are hardliners within the ANC and its allies in the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, who continue to call for aggressive expropriation without compensation in South Africa. For years, land reform has been one of the most sensitive and polarizing issues in the country. The ANC has promised accelerated land redistribution to address historical injustices, but progress has been slow, often hindered by bureaucratic inefficiency and corruption. Against this backdrop, Ramaphosa's reference to Zimbabwe was likely intended to placate radical factions and signal a commitment to faster change. However, the backlash now threatens to undercut his credibility with investors, agricultural stakeholders, and ordinary South Africans fearful of instability. The DA has already announced plans to raise the issue in Parliament, demanding that Ramaphosa clarify his stance and commit to a land reform program that prioritizes sustainability, productivity, and the rule of law. The controversy has not gone unnoticed beyond South Africa's borders. Analysts warn that even the perception of Pretoria leaning towards Zimbabwe-style policies could spook investors and harm South Africa's already fragile economy. With unemployment hovering above 30% and food insecurity affecting millions, any policy misstep could tip the scales further toward crisis. International observers, too, have drawn parallels between Zimbabwe's collapse and South Africa's current challenges. South Africa must tread carefully, one regional economist commented. The lesson of Zimbabwe is not that land reform should be avoided, but that it must be handled with competence, fairness, and a commitment to maintaining food security. Ignoring those lessons would be a grave mistake. The DA insists that meaningful land reform is possible without replicating Zimbabwe's failures. The party has long advocated for a market-driven, transparent system of land redistribution that provides support to new farmers and ensures productive use of agricultural land. It argues that land reform must be paired with training, financing, and infrastructure, rather than mere transfers of title deeds that risk leaving farms idle. Steenhuisen emphasized that the DA is not opposed to correcting the injustices of the past but insists it must be done responsibly. We cannot allow South Africa to repeat Zimbabwe's tragedy. What we need is a program that uplifts communities, strengthens food security, and preserves our economic stability, not one that plunges us into chaos. As the political firestorm rages, Ramaphosa faces a difficult choice. Will he double down on his remarks to court support from radical elements, or will he backtrack in an effort to calm markets and reassure South Africans that the Zimbabwean model will not be imported wholesale? For now, the DA has succeeded in framing the president's comments as a dangerous flirtation with failure. Whether this develops into a full-blown political crisis depends on Ramaphosa's next move, and whether South Africans believe his vision for land reform is one of progress or peril.